So I'm really excited to be here, really excited to have been asked to come. I'm just very excited about this whole thing, Girls Right Now. I'm looking forward very much to hearing their readings, and I just feel really happy to be here. I think it's a fantastic thing. I just really love the idea of making girls realize what they can do, and because I believe very much that there's nothing that girls cannot do if they put their minds to it. I'm going to read from a story called Cell 1 in my story collection, The Thing Around Your Neck. And it's a story set in Nsukka, which is the town where I grew up in eastern Nigeria. And it's also a story that's, it's loosely based on my own experiences. And I think the only other thing I will say before I start to read is that my brother doesn't like the story very much. And I'll read a short excerpt and maybe you'll figure out why he doesn't like it. And I love my brother very much, by the way. The first time our house was robbed, it was our neighbor, Osita, who climbed in through the dining room window and stole our TV, our VCR, and the Purple Rain and Thriller videotapes my father had brought back from America. The second time our house was robbed, it was my brother, Nnamabia, who faked a break-in and stole my mother's jewelry. It happened on a Sunday. My parents had traveled to our hometown to visit our grandparents, so Nnamabia and I went to church alone. He drove my mother's green car. We sat together in church as we usually did, but we did not nudge each other and stifle giggles about somebody's ugly hat or threadbare kaftan, because Nnamabia left without a word after about 10 minutes. He came back just before the priest said, "The mass is ended, go in peace." I was a little piqued. I imagined he had gone off to smoke and to see some girl, since he had the car to himself for once, but he could at least have told me where he was going. We drove home in silence, and when he parked in our long driveway, I stopped to pluck some Ixora flowers while Nnamabia unlocked the front door. I went inside to find him standing still in the middle of the parlor. "We've been robbed," he said in English. It took me a moment to understand, to take in the scattered room. Even then, I felt that there was a theatrical quality to the way the drawers were flung open, as if it had been done by somebody who wanted to make an impression on the discoverers. Or perhaps it was simply that I knew my brother so well. Later, when my parents came home and neighbors began to troop in to say "ndo" and to snap their fingers up and down, to snap their fingers and heave their shoulders up and down, I sat alone in my room upstairs and realized what the queasiness in my gut was. Nnamabia had done it, I knew. My father knew too. He pointed out that the window louvers had been slipped out from the inside rather than the outside, and that the robber knew exactly where my mother's jewelry was, the left corner of her metal trunk. Nnamabia stared at my father with dramatic, wounded eyes and said, "I know I've caused you both terrible pain in the past, but I would never violate your trust like this." He spoke English, using unnecessary words like terrible pain and violate, as he always did when he was defending himself. Then he walked out through the back door and did not come home that night, or the next night, or the night after. He came home 2 weeks later, gaunt, smelling of beer, crying, saying he was sorry and he had pawned the jewelry to the Hausa traders in Enugu and all the money was gone. "How much did they give you for my gold?" my mother asked him. And when he told her, she placed both hands on her head and cried, "Oh, Chimamanda, my God has killed me." It was as if she felt that the least he could have done was get a good price. I wanted to slap her. My father asked Nnamabia to write a report, how he had sold the jewelry, what he had spent the money on, with whom he had spent it. I didn't think Nnamabia would tell the truth, and I don't think my father thought he would either. But he liked reports, my professor father. He liked things written down and nicely documented. Besides, Nnamabia was 17, with a carefully tended beard. He was in that space between secondary school and university, almost too old for caning. What else could my father have done? After Namabia wrote the report, my father filed it in the drawer in his study where he kept our school papers. That he could have hurt his mother like this was the last thing my father said. But Namabia really hadn't set out to hurt my mother. He did it because my mother's jewelry was the only thing of any value in the house. A lifetime collection of solid gold pieces. He did it too because other sons of professors were doing it. The thieving boys were the popular ones. They drove their parents' cars in the evening, their seats pushed back and their arms stretched out to reach the steering wheel. Osita, the neighbor who had stolen our TV only weeks before Namabia's incident, was lithe and handsome in a brooding sort of way and walked with the grace of a cat. His shirts were always sharply ironed. I used to look across the hedge and see him and close my eyes and imagine that he was walking toward me, coming to claim me as his. He never noticed me. Osita was 2 years older than Namabia. Most of the thieving boys were a little older than Namabia, and perhaps that was why Namabia did not steal from another person's house. Perhaps he did not feel old enough, qualified enough for anything bigger than my mother's jewelry. Namabia looked just like my mother, with that honey-fair complexion, large eyes, and a generous mouth that curved perfectly. When my mother took us to the market, traders would call out, "Hey, madam, why did you waste your fair skin on a boy and leave the girl so dark? What is a boy doing with all of this beauty?" And my mother would chuckle as though she took a mischievous and joyful responsibility for Namabia's good looks. When at 11, Namabia broke the window of his classroom with a stone, my mother gave him the money to replace it and did not tell my father. When he lost some library books in class 2, she told his teacher that our houseboy had stolen them. When in class 3, he left early every day to attend catechism, and it turned out he never once went, and so could not receive Holy Communion, my mother told the other parents that he had malaria on the examination day. When he took the key of my father's car and pressed it into a piece of soap that my father found before Namabia could take it to a locksmith, my mother made vague sounds about how he was just experimenting and it didn't mean a thing. When he stole the exam questions from my father's study and sold them to my father's students, my mother shouted at him, but then told my father that Namabia was 16 after all and really should be given more pocket money. I don't know whether Namabia felt remorse for stealing her jewelry. I could not always tell from my brother's gracious, smiling face what it was he really felt. And we did not talk about it. Even though my mother's sisters sent her the gold earrings, even though my mother bought an earring and pendant set from the glamorous woman who imported gold from Italy, we never talked after that day about Namabia stealing her jewelry. It was as if pretending that Namabia had not done the things he had done would give him the opportunity to start afresh. The robbery might never have been mentioned again if Namabia had not been arrested 3 years later and locked up at the police station. I'll stop here. Thank you.